Researchers think that they've discovered a lost golden age of nutrition, a small window of time where people consumed up to 5,000 calories a day and yet lived longer, healthier lives and had stronger immune systems than we do today in the modern world. Apparently, all thanks to their incredibly nutritious diet. The crazy part about this golden age, it only lasted 30 years, and it took place 200 years ago in Mid-Victorian England. But how could this be? It doesn't really make any sense. Why and how could people in the past be healthier than we are now today? A quick disclaimer before we get into it. I thought this research article was fascinating and I couldn't stop thinking about it. It was published in the Journal of the Royal Society of Medicine by 2 professors as well as a few collaborators, but I am not claiming that it's science or fact. And as you're going to see, there are a lot of bold claims being made that I can't possibly verify or even question. It's 200 years ago. Really, the conclusion of these researchers was that this is a crazy discovery on their part, and it warrants and deserves further research because, as you're about to see, if everything we're about to talk about is true, then we desperately need to rethink the modern diet. But that being said, I thought this article was fascinating, interesting, useful, had a very health promoting message. So yeah, let's get into it. But first, this video is sponsored by Delete Me. Delete Me finds and deletes your private and personal information from the internet. It feels like every day I get more spam emails and especially robocalls. It's actually to the point where I do not answer my phone anymore. I probably get 2 to 3 calls every single day and it's only getting worse. Seriously, I can't be the only one dealing with this. And the truth is, our personal data is everywhere online. There are companies that scrape data about us, our relatives, and our loved ones and sell it. Phone numbers, birthdays, home addresses, social security numbers, voter registrations, all information that you consider to be private. These data brokers are in the business of sticking their nose in your business. You have the right to stay private, and I recommend Delete Me to protect your personal data. I'm sure you've seen a lot of YouTubers get hacked, and I'm constantly getting phishing attacks in my email inbox. After registering, I told Delete Me about me. I gave them my phone number, my address, and some other info to help them find my data. Then they went out and found what data brokers were selling my data. Then the best part is they helped to remove it automatically. It takes some time for Delete Me to find everything, but their service knows where to look. Take action today and protect your private information with Delete Me. Click the link in the description box below and get 20% off with my code Kiana. Thank you to Delete Me for sponsoring today's video. And back to the video. The Mid-Victorian period is usually defined as the years between 1850 and 1870, but in nutritional terms, we have identified a slightly longer period, lasting until 1880. During these 30 years, we argue here a generation grew up with probably the best standards of health ever enjoyed by a modern state. Bold statements here. So these researchers seriously believe that somehow, some way, people 200 years ago in Victorian England were healthier than we are today. And this was no small feat because being alive in Victorian England, it wasn't exactly the type of environment that we associate with good health. But let's just take a moment quickly and try and get a vibe for what life in Victorian England was actually like, because when I first read about this article, I was drawing blanks. We'll start with how people looked during that time period. So we're talking top hats, puffy dresses, horse and buggies. Also, I found this photo of a wealthy family in 1850, just hanging out with all the other normal photos. Does anyone see the problem with this? Okay, normal. What's going on there? Anyway, this was a crazy time to be in London, England. People were flooding into the city from the countryside looking to find work during the Industrial Revolution. The population suddenly went from 2 million people to 6.5 million people. And think about what life must have been like back then. The entire city was essentially jammed on top of each other. There's no infrastructure to sustain this many people, so everyone is literally working shoulder to shoulder to build London up into part of what it is today. Which is why I say this is not the type of environment that we associate with good health. If you time traveled back to Victorian England and took a step into the cobblestone streets, the first thing you'd notice would be the thick, deep mud grabbing at your ankles. Except it wasn't mud. It was horse to be exact. By the 1890s, there were approximately 300,000 horses and 1,000 tons of dung a day lining the streets of London. They literally could not scoop it fast enough to get it off the streets. And on top of that, the ammonia from the urine was so potent that it would literally sting your eyeballs and was peeling the paint off buildings. So actually the smell would have probably been realistically the first thing that you noticed. And it wasn't just the scent of horse manure that was the problem. Victorian England was super gross and stinky for like a million different reasons. Many of them poop related, unfortunately, and I promise this is all relevant. Indoor plumbing wasn't a thing yet for most people. Unless you were extremely rich, your toilet probably looked a little something like this, with a hole that dropped down into a cesspit, sometimes right underneath your floorboards. And so you had a city of hundreds of thousands of cesspits under houses, in backyards, and literally flowing into the River Thames. The River Thames, aka the huge iconic river flowing right through London, was being used as a dumping ground for human, animal, and industrial waste, and the entire city had a putrid scent because of it, particularly in summer. Not to mention that there was so much air pollution from the factories that the city literally had a dark, dirty cloud hanging over it, and people would literally need to wash their face every few hours to remove the soot. The reason I say it's all relevant is because obviously this is all super unhealthy. Clean air, clean water, that's really important to health. In particular, it's incredibly unhealthy to live so close to so much sewage. And yeah, this sewage ended up contaminating a lot of the clean water in the area. Clean water, I mean, the line was a little blurry between clean water and dirty water, which is part of the problem, leading to recurring outbreaks of deadly diseases like typhoid and cholera. The prevalence of deadly infectious diseases like these, combined with a huge population living in extremely close quarters, as well as the state of Victorian medicine and science. I mean, early Victorians didn't even know about germs yet. Half the time the treatment was as likely to kill you as the disease itself. All this meant that death was very common in Victorian England. And again, this is a statement that we don't really associate with some sort of golden era of health. Like, these types of diseases were wiping people out back then. The top cause of death were all infectious diseases, and kids were the most at risk. More than half of all babies born would not live to see their first birthday, and almost 45% of all deaths in 1844 were for persons under 5 years old. And if you somehow managed to make it past age 5, common causes of death included being lit on fire from highly combustible clothing, being crushed or maimed by an unregulated factory machine, or being poisoned by your arsenic wallpaper or phosphorus matchsticks. And yet, with all that being said, Victorian contemporary sources reveal that life expectancy for adults in the mid-Victorian period was almost exactly what it is today. Now, most sources place Victorian life expectancy, given all the ways to die we've just covered, around age 40 for men and 42 for women. Now, that's actually nowhere near today's standards, obviously, where the average person in North America or the UK can expect to live around 80 years old. However, the crude average figures often used to depict the brevity of Victorian lives mislead because they include infant mortality, which we've established was a huge problem. If we strip out perinatal mortality, however, and look at the life expectancy of those who survive the first 5 years, a very different picture emerges. The authors claim that with this taken into account, the actual life expectancy was 75 years for men and 73 years for women. In other words, Victoria-era life expectancy, according to this extremely authoritative source, was actually better than some first world countries today. Cough, cough. America. Quote, US life expectancy has declined to 76.4 years, the shortest it's been in nearly 2 decades. According to 2021 data from the CDC, American women can now expect to live 79.3 years, while men can expect to live to just 73.5. Yet, we don't have to contend with smallpox or cholera or flammable dresses. How is it possible that mid-Victorians could be living longer lives than we are today? What the mid-Victorians weren't dying from is any of the things that we commonly die from today. Quote, given that modern pharmaceutical, surgical, anesthetic, scanning, and other diagnostic technologies were self-evidently unavailable to the mid-Victorians, their high life expectancy is very striking and can only have been due to their health-promoting lifestyle. So my first thought was, okay, well, maybe it was the rich people. And that actually makes a lot of sense, because if you were rich in Victorian England, you were rich. Like, you just had random stuff with gold on it. You lived in a ridiculous minimalist castle-esque home far away from stinky London. You may have even had indoor plumbing. Not only that, but chefs and servants and access to the absolute best of everything money could offer. So presumably this relaxing, easy lifestyle combined with whatever their fancy diets were, maybe this is what led to the uptick in life expectancy. Except it wasn't the rich people. Somehow, interestingly, it was the working class people. The working class lifestyle and their prolonged good health was due to their high levels of physical activity and, as a consequence, how and what they ate. You see, first off, being sedentary in mid-Victorian England as a working class people, that's not a thing. No one was sedentary. There was next to no desk jobs for the working class. Almost all work involved moderate to heavy physical labor, and often included that involved getting to work. Seasonal and other low-paid workers often had to walk up to 6 miles per day. That's just to start. It's just to get to and from work, and it wasn't just the men either. While some Victorian working class women worked from home, seamstressing, for instance, more went out to work in shops, factories, and workshops, necessitating long days on their feet, plus the additional burden of housework. And we are not just talking running the dishwasher and Swiffering after work. Everything was hard back then. Housework meant carrying heavy bins of coal for the fire or water for washing up flights of stairs, or scrubbing clothing in wash bins. So it literally took some level of physical fitness just to exist, just to go about your daily life back then. Men worked on average 9 to 10 hours a day for 5.5 to 6 days a week, giving a range from 50 to 60 hours of physical activity per week. Factoring in the walk to and from work increases the range of total hours of work-related physical activity up to 55 to 70 hours per week, and women's expenditure of effort was similarly large. Not to mention, hobby-wise, the most sedentary behavior you realistically could engage in would be reading a book. That's it. I don't even think that most people had comfy couches back then. Every other leisure activity involved some sort of physical effort. Meanwhile, in the modern world, just what a contrast to today, where it seems like every single activity involves sitting down. And most people are still grinding all day long, but from a seated position. Due to the high levels of physical activity routinely undertaken by the Victorian working classes, calorific requirements range between 150 and 200% of today's historically low values. Working so much meant that women needed around 3,000 calories a day, while men could go all the way up to 5,000 just to maintain their body weight. So the mid-Victorians had to be eating essentially double what we do today, and yet obviously overweight and obesity were relatively unheard of. Unless you were rich, in which case obesity was fairly common, and you may have even contracted gout, aka the disease of kings, a disease associated with enjoying life's finer things a little too much. But it's not just the amount of food the mid-Victorians consumed that is so unfamiliar. The composition of their diet was also very different from our own. So the authors of the paper argue that this entire time we've been underestimating just how epic the mid-Victorian diet really was, at least for that specific 30-year window of time. The 1840s, right before the period we're discussing, was actually called the Hungry 40s because famine was such a problem. But by the 1850s, suddenly these different economic and environmental conditions started stacking up in a way that caused the sudden golden era of nutrition to suddenly appear out of nowhere. Ironically, when Charles Dickens wrote, "Please, sir, can I have some more?" he was actually talking about Victorian England. But this wasn't accurate by the 50s. Yes, people were still poor, but they weren't going hungry. And actually, being poor turned out to be somewhat of an advantage. So the record shows that working class mid-Victorians spent most of their food money on carbs. White bread and potatoes were the primary staples. Behind that, meat, as much of that as they could afford, which wasn't very much. Now, nothing wrong with those things. Potatoes and meat in particular are extremely nutritious, but it's really not quite what we expect when we think of the healthiest diet ever. However, these were the expensive foods, so they were their most coveted staples, but they couldn't afford to eat 3,000 or 4,000 or 5,000 calories of these foods each and every day. So they had to bulk them up with what was cheap. And this is what turned out to be this incredible health advantage. Thanks to things like sudden improvements in farming technology and changes to certain farming laws, suddenly vegetables and fruits became abundant and cheap. At the very same time, recently expanded railway lines meant trains from the countryside were bringing in freshly picked food to the cities for the masses daily. Antioxidant-rich onions and mineral-rich watercress were the cheapest. A poor family could get big bunches of these for next to nothing almost any day of the week. Seasonally, they also had plentiful artichokes, carrots, turnips in winter, and cruciferous cabbage, broccoli, and radishes from spring to summer. Fruits like apples, cherries, gooseberries, and plums were eaten ripe throughout the summer months and then preserved via jams and candies for year-round consumption. An entire pint of cherries, which for me, I think is going for about $10 at the local grocery store right now if it's not on sale, would be sold for half a penny, which even with inflation was really, really cheap back then. So Victorians, by necessity, had to bulk up their meals with these cheap but super nutrient-dense foods. It's estimated they were eating at least 8 to 10 portions of fruits and vegetables each and every day, which is nearly double the 5 servings per day recommended by most governments today. Not only that, but today, most of us don't even get close to that recommendation. According to a 2017 report by the CDC, only 1 in 10 adults get enough fruits or vegetables every day. So not even 5 portions of both in total. On top of that, modern fruits and vegetables are much less nutrition than their Victorian counterparts would have been, thanks to soil depletion and aggressive farming tactics. A landmark study reviewed agricultural and nutritional data from 1950 and 1999 for 43 different vegetables and fruits, finding reliable declines in the amount of protein, calcium, phosphorus, iron, riboflavin, vitamin B2, and vitamin C over the past half century. Why? Well, efforts to breed new varieties of crops to provide greater yield, pest resistance, and climate adaptability have allowed crops to grow bigger and more rapidly. But their ability to manufacture or uptake nutrients has not kept pace with their rapid growth. There have likely been declines in other nutrients too, such as magnesium, zinc, and vitamins B6 and E. But they were not studied in 1950, and more research is needed to find out how much less we are getting of these key vitamins and minerals. And that's just vegetables. Victorians were dusting us in nearly every way possible when it comes to the quality of their diets. Fish and cheaper but more nutritious cuts of meat were also extremely crucial parts of the Victorian diet. Omega-3 fatty acid-rich herring was the most commonly consumed fish, with head and roe eaten as well. Personally, I don't think I've ever eaten a fish head, and the most commonly purchased and sold pieces of fish at the grocery store are boneless fillets. Most heads, tails, and carcasses are considered undesirable and turn into animal feed or farm fertilizer instead. And the thing is, the head and some of the other byproducts are some of the most nutrient-dense, fattiest parts of the fish, containing extra high levels of vitamin A, omega-3 fatty acids, iron, zinc, and calcium. Same with overall meat consumption patterns. Meat was considered to be the most important, substantial part of the Victorian diet. The rich gorged themselves on meat, and even the poorest people ate meat several times per week. But they couldn't always get the best cuts of meat. Today, we're eating mostly pure prime cuts of pure muscle. Whereas back then, this was just not the case for most working class people. Meat on the bone, shin or cheek, stewed or fried, was the most economical form of meat, generally eked out with offal meats including brains, heart, sweetbreads, liver, kidneys, and pluck, the lungs and intestines of sheep. Working class people could really only afford to eat the types of meat that we consider to be undesirable today. Yet, nutrient composition wise, this was another huge win for their health. When we compare eating a modern T-bone steak to the same amount of liver or even heart, we are just getting so much more nutrients for the same amount of volume with the offal. They were just getting so many more nutrients. Quote, the Mid-Victorian diet had a lower calorific density and a higher nutrient density than ours. It had a higher content of fiber, including fermentable fiber, and a lower sodium/potassium ratio. In short, the Mid-Victorians ate a diet that was not only considerably better than our own, but also far in advance of current government recommendations. It more closely resembles the Mediterranean diet, proven in many studies to promote health and longevity, or even the Paleolithic diet recommended by some nutritionists. I realized while editing that though the article didn't mention it, the Mid-Victorians must have also been cooking their vegetables in a lot of fat. Likely animal fats like tallow and lard, and maybe also butter. Imagine if every single meal that you ate was like double in size and composed 100% of super nutrient-dense items. You'd have to assume that that would have some sort of beneficial effect on human health. You know, in the modern world, the focus tends to be on what not to eat, but in reality, maybe our focus should be tilted more toward eating more of the right stuff. Like, it wasn't just that the Victorians were eating healthy foods, but a lot of them, which points to the importance for all of us of eating enough each day, getting a lot of physical activity and then fueling yourself with the right fuel for that activity. If the Victorian diet really was this nutrient dense, their cells were like bathing in vitamins and minerals and antioxidants and probably a bunch of compounds we don't even fully understand yet. And maybe this is how they managed to live such long lives, despite living in such horrible conditions. But what happened? Because remember, this was just a window, and according to the authors of this paper, by the year 1900, that window had slammed shut. Life expectancy took a huge nosedive between 1860 and 1900, back more toward what we might expect it to look like in a place surrounded by poop. Well, the golden era of nutrition was over. By 1880, Britain was importing a ton of cheap food basics from around the world. This expansion in the range of foods was advertised by most contemporaries and by subsequent historians as representing a significant improvement in the working class diet. The reality was very different. These changes undoubtedly increased the variety and quantity of the working class diet, but its quality deteriorated markedly. White bread and flour suddenly became way cheaper as new manufacturing techniques and North American imports reduced their price. And remember, the Mid-Victorians didn't just love fruits and vegetables or something. They weren't trying to be healthy. They didn't even know how healthy these things were. They really wanted more potatoes and meat and bread. They just couldn't afford it. So the percentage of their diet that was healthy fruits and veggies started to be displaced. It started to decline. Tinned meat arrived from around the world and was suddenly much cheaper than any other meat they could get from other sources. So again, now their nutrient-dense organ meats are being displaced by canned meats, which are fattier and saltier and potentially tastier, but way lower in anything beneficial. And keep in mind, people aren't going to get fridges for another 50 years at this point, so being tinned and not having to be kept in the fridge was probably a really big deal to them. So canned processed foods that don't go bad in 2 days, that was a huge win in mid-Victorian England, and another factor pushing people toward these new processed foods. And finally, something else got cheaper at the same time as well: sugar. Sugar is universally loved, so as soon as the masses could afford it, they bought it. Candy and confectionery were mass-produced for the first time, and new processed foods such as fruits bathed in heavy syrup became commonplace. Cheap sugar resulted in such a surge in sugar consumption that by the year 1900, it was commonly noted that people could no longer chew tough foods and were unable to eat many vegetables, fruits, and nuts because it rotted their teeth. That same year, not only had life expectancy declined, but stamina and even their height as well. Within 2 generations, male health nationally had deteriorated to such an extent that in 1900, 5 out of 10 young men volunteering for the Second Boer War had to be rejected because they were so undernourished. They were not starved, but had been consuming the wrong foods. The fall in nutritional standards between 1880 and 1900 was so marked that the generations were visibly and progressively shrinking. In 1883, the infantry were forced to lower the minimum height for recruits from 5'6" to 5'3". Modern studies have confirmed that a poor diet in childhood can literally stunt your growth, which is what the authors are claiming happened here. So what do you guys think? Could diet and exercise alone really be enough to counteract such an unhealthy environment? Is it possible that the mid-Victorians really were healthier than we are today? Or do you think that these researchers got it wrong and there must be a mistake? Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.